So let's start with a basic definition. Usually when we think of fantasy games, we think of traditional elements like orcs and elves. So Daniel, what is your definition of what a fantasy game is?
Wow. Well, fantasy, I think, is one of those things that's better understood by what it's not. Because fantasy gets all conflated with science fiction, with speculative fiction, with all these kind of umbrella terms we have, so we don't have to say genre fiction because that's pejorative. But to me, to be fantasy, there's a real critical component. It has to be more than just magical worlds, more than just supernatural. I actually looked this up on Wikipedia ahead of time.
Oh, okay.
I kind of didn't agree with. I don't think they exactly got it because it goes beyond magic and supernatural. It's what magic and supernatural come from, and to me, it's that mythological basis that I believe is completely missing from the lives of 20th century people today. That there's an important ground that humanity kind of has a yearning to be connected to, that we have in many ways failed to connect ourselves with, and our cultures with, and our societies with. And so we kind of are like dry sponges when we find it, and we can find it in little pieces, bits and pieces in fantasy. And I think it's something that we have a collective yearning for. In learning how to be a fantasy writer before there, for video games, before there really was such a thing, I spent a lot of time studying Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung, and what they had to say really struck a chord with me. And so I think that what is valuable in fantasy, and I think that one reason that Tolkien appealed to me so much as a kid was because he found it. I think he, by accident, but he really found it. He really hit that mythic dimension. So there can be plenty of stories about orcs and swords and princes and all this stuff, and they'll only kind of give us that middling kind of buzz that the good stuff does. But when the good stuff really hits us, it really hits us, and it hits us at a level that we really can't talk about too easily. So that's why fantasy is compelling. That's why fantasy keeps bringing us back. That's why fantasy's done badly so often, because we mimic the form.
So it's not just, get these elements and it's fantasy. Jeff, I think that, what kind of myths do you think connect with fantasy?
What kind of?
Like the traditional fantasies. I mean, why do they resonate so much with modern audiences?
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that in the last couple of centuries we've lost a lot of the more concrete rites of passage, and to me, what fantasy really is it takes the essence of the rite of passage and it creates metaphoric elements around it. So I think Dan is absolutely right when he talks about the fact that we're connecting with good fantasy, traditional or not, when we are when it's focused on the human aspect of going on a spiritual journey, on a journey that is both physical and metaphysical, because it has to do with reaching a new perspective on life, reaching a new platform in terms of your mental and physical development.
Steve, so when you have run fantasy live-action role-playing games, what do the audiences really like about the fantasy games versus the other types?
Well, I think the important thing in fantasy is that a fantasy story, like a fairy tale, is speaking to psychological desires and needs people have. And fantasy gives people a chance to feel like you're in the story. One of the things that has really happened in today's entertainment world is we've been made more and more passive as part of the story. The story happens to us. We get told the story. You go and you watch a Disney movie and it tells you the story. Fantasy, both in general and in games and more particularly, really enables people to feel like they are part of it and they're making a difference, and that they can achieve power in a world and achieve and make a difference and become essentially a central figure and a hero of a story. And that element, for some reason, in fantasy, and I'm not entirely sure why it is more so with fantasy than, say, modern fiction, like a modern spy thriller, but fantasy games have that attraction. Like a modern Lovecraft game draws people. It just in the same way that a medieval fantasy, a well-done medieval fantasy that taps into that mythic structure that you mentioned, that connects psychologically with people and gives them that feeling of being able to, I guess, be there and change the world.
You want to?
So you would see a difference between like a Cthulhu game, which would be like modern fantasy, and a spy game, which would be kind of grounded in contemporary reality.
What I've always observed is that even though players enjoy both, the Cthulhu game gets people involved at a level that is just very, very, very visceral. Very much, this feeling, people will talk about the feeling of doom and the feeling of, whereas in the spy game, yeah, they had fun, and everyone loves to play James Bond, but it just isn't quite the same.
Yeah.